It's right around the corner, voting. Stay tuned to learn how to vote, where to vote, and make certain that your ballot counts. Thank you so much for being here, Secretary Benson. You have been just such a champion of all things related to voter engagement. And AARP, we want to make certain people know where to vote, how to vote, and that they vote safely and securely. So there has been some changes in the voting, positive changes in voting rights and voting access. Talk a little bit about what's happened since the last election.
Well, thank you for having me here and for this important conversation. It has been quite a year for democracy in our state.
Yes.
We've seen a lot of changes, building off of the changes that were enacted by voters in 2022, where voters, in addition to previously amending our state constitution to allow voter registration to happen anytime, automatically when you get your license, now we have 9 days of early voting. That's the biggest change going into 2024. Voters enacted an amendment to our Constitution to require every locality to provide early voting, which is you go in, you vote just like it was election day, but you do it on a Saturday or a Sunday or the week before election day. And you can be done and on and out with your way, on your way as easy as pie. And so we're working to set up early voting sites all across the state in advance of our presidential primary happening in February. And you'll see early voting now as a staple and an option for voting in our state in every statewide election moving forward.
You know, you say that so easily. We fought what to get that make that happen. It was a collaborative effort, of course, but you led the charge on that. This was not easy. That people wanted to have you submit Social Security numbers and all sorts of things. But you have been such a champion and a warrior for making certain that people can go to the polls, feel safe, feel comfortable, and vote. Have be convenient for them to be able to vote as well.
Yeah.
And there's been a tremendous turnout in the last few years for voters, been more engaged than ever.
Truly, yeah. We've seen in 2020, we had our highest turnout election ever in state history. And then in 2022, we had our highest midterm turnout election ever in state history. And we also led the nation in youth vote turnout in 2022, all in part because we have these changes to the laws that simply give citizens options, equally secure, equally accessible, whether you want to vote from home and return your ballot through the mail or at a local drop box. Now you can vote early, or you can vote the traditional way in person on election day, whatever's easy for you. And we try to, I believe very strongly in meeting people where they are and bringing government to the people instead of saying, you have to come to us. And that's what our voting system really now demonstrates, that whatever you choose to cast your ballot, we will make that available to you securely and efficiently.
So you are the 43rd Secretary of State.
Mm-hmm.
What surprised you the most about your job and since the time that you've been here?
It's a great question. I think one, how much I love it. I mean, there's so much I get to do every day, not just in voting, but on the customer service side, and how, my first few months in office, where I saw really the decades of in many ways, neglect that led to branch offices having 5-7 hour waits for even the simplest transaction was really unacceptable to me. And to be able to take a state agency and reform it in a way that eliminated those wait times, modernized our state services, while also launching mobile branches, where we now, my goal is to have a mobile branch office, which is a standalone branch office in a van at every senior center in the state in 1 day a month. We already have 5 in the field. We'll have 7 by next year, all across the state, one just dedicated to the Upper Peninsula. And we want to go consistently. We want everyone to know where to get their license, even at a mobile office, if they can't make it to a physical branch.
And you're talking a lot about just accessibility and the convenience of being able to access, whether it's a driver's license or whether it's your ballot. If people want to vote from home, are the ballots mailed to them, or will they have to go and ask for a ballot? How do they get a voting ballot to be able?
It's a great question. You can go online, michigan.gov/vote, and request your ballot be sent to you. I just signed as acting governor legislation creating this portal for you to go in and fill out your own information and have that ballot sent to you in every election if you want. But in addition to that, if you don't want to go online or don't feel comfortable going online, you can mail in a request form or just send a request to your clerk call your clerk or go into a clerk's office and request the form, and then fill it out, and your ballot will be sent to you if you want in every election, or you can request just for that election, depending on what your choice is.
For any reason, because it used to be you had to show that you're out of town, or you have to be for
now,
any reason.
No questions asked.
That's such a, ARP was a major supporter of that. So thank you. Thank you.
I mean, you've helped us dramatically change democracy in our state. When I took office, sometimes as low as 38% of our electorate would vote in an election. Now we're consistently at 60-70% turnout, in part because we've made it easier to vote, in part because citizens and groups like AARP have demanded that these options be available to everyone. So my job now is just to make sure that people know about these options. So it's great news to be able to spread.
We'll keep working together on that as well. And as you mentioned, in it was 2020, the last election, 2022.
Yeah.
60% of all votes cast were cast by people who are 50 and older.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And then the young, like you said, the young people showed up in record numbers more than anywhere else in the country. That's incredible. And that's just, again, a testament to how when you make voting accessible and people feel comfortable and secure voting. But talk a little bit about some of the intimidation that may be going on in terms of the voting place and where people are. And, we're being hearing things. I know guns aren't allowed anymore, thank goodness. But the people are just being a little afraid to go to the polls right now.
Yeah, I mean, voter intimidation has always been a tactic used to get people to feel fearful of voting, or feel that their vote doesn't count, or that they shouldn't jump through any hoops in order to cast their ballot. It's been a tactic that has been used to silence voices and stop people from using their power of citizenship, which is that vote. And so we've worked to try to cut through that and make sure people feel safe at the polls. And we have just recently passed legislation to protect election workers as well. And we'll be building partnerships with organizations like AARP and others to make sure citizens are empowered with the truth about their voice and their vote and how to exercise it, and have no reason to be fearful of exercising that vote at any point. And we need to anticipate that bad actors will try to put robocalls out there or lie to citizens about the day of the election or how to vote or what happens if you do. And so we all have a responsibility to be truth tellers in this moment so that citizens know their rights and feel empowered to cast their vote no matter how many bad guys try to stop them.
And I want to applaud you too, because you created this task force that's called
the Voter Confidence Council. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm a part of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's trying to get to exactly what you're saying. We're across the country. This task force, our members are from across the country, and they're to share with you and to share with your office whatever they see that might not be truthful or might make you kind of go, or question something.
Yeah, and help us counter that, because our best response to these efforts to lie to citizens about democracy and voting in this moment is to respond with the truth, and to respond with the voices of folks like yourself and other leaders who are trusted voices, who people know will tell them the truth. And so when it comes to telling people the truth about elections and their voice and their vote, who better than you, Paula, or others who are such trusted, reliable leaders who always speak the truth and do so with such fervor and strength. And so we'll be working with leaders all across the state to make sure that you have all that you need to ensure citizens know the truth about our elections, because this is going to be an important election in 2024.
Absolutely.
And we want people to know how important their vote will be in that election.
So if someone hears something, they have a question about regarding the election, where to vote, how to vote, and we want to talk about the redistricting in a moment as well. How can they check that? How can they fact check what they're hearing? Is there a website that they can go to? Do they call? What do they do?
Yes, a couple of things. One, michigan.gov/vote is the portal for all voting information in the state. So you can always go there and get your questions answered. We also have on that page a opportunity for you to enter your question, or you can email it to misinformation@michigan.gov and say, hey, I heard this, is it true? And you'll have an expert respond to you with that. But also your members can ask you, because you're going to be an expert in all things election. So, or if you have a specific question about, am I registered to vote, you can also call your local clerk. And local clerks are on call all the time and have full dedication to making sure people have the tools they need to vote in their communities.
And those websites are on the screen now, so make certain that you copy those. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to use those websites. People don't know, with some of the redistricting that occurred, where to vote anymore. That has changed a lot, and we could talk all day about redistricting, but we won't for a lot of reasons. reasons. So if they're not sure where to vote, they can go to that website as well and find out.
You can, at michigan.gov/vote, you can just enter in your information. It'll tell you who your clerk is if you want to call them. It'll tell them where to vote early if you want to vote early. It'll tell you where you can vote on election day. And it'll tell you anything else you need to know, like whether you need to register. If you want to request to vote from home, you can do so at that same portal. So it's all in one stop. And also, if you do choose to vote from home, it'll tell you where a drop box is where you can return your ballot.
Drop boxes, just the name of that name.
And if you choose to,
they were almost gone.
They were, but thanks to you, we got it in our Constitution,
a lot of folks,
as well as
and
as well as prepaid postage. If you choose to mail your ballot back, you don't have to pay for postage anymore. We've covered that. So we're doing everything we can to make all options to vote available to citizens. And now what we need to do is just get the word out so that people know about all these opportunities they have to cast a vote, not just in November, but in our August primary, in our February 27th presidential primary, and in local elections as well.
Absolutely. What concerns you the most about 2024 election?
I think people who have been, people potentially feel their voice doesn't count or doesn't matter, or feel, because there's a strategy in play to make us feel like our voices don't matter, or our government doesn't represent us, or that we shouldn't vote. And I think anytime people feel discouraged or just throw up their hands and say, I don't know which candidate to support or who to believe, so I'm just going to stay home, then we all lose. Because the less people who vote, then the less people actually have voices heard and represented. So I'm deeply concerned about people feeling discouraged by all the noise and just the rancor and the nastiness of politics today, and just tuning out and giving up. And you'll have on top of that a lot of politicians who want them to tune out and give up and not have their voice heard. And they'll be feeding into that with lies and artificial intelligence and other types of technologies. So we want everyone to just block out the noise and recognize the power of their voice and how important it is that it's heard in this critical election cycle, and find a way to make your voice heard no matter how you choose to vote, so that we'll all be better off.
I very much appreciate you saying that, because one would expect that you'd be talking about something else, but it's just making certain that individuals, people who are afraid, people whose voices won't be heard unless they go to the ballot box, have access and have the opportunity to do that without the fear of intimidation. And talk a little bit about people who are saying that the election was stolen, or that how the votes are counted. We have someone in our office, Kathleen Simar, who worked in that behind the scenes, and she tells us all the time how many fact checks and spot checks there are.
Oh yeah, so many layers of security in our election system. And I look at every, misinformation or every attack as an opportunity to just simply educate people about the truth. We actually have many layers of security in our process, and how you get your ballot or return your ballot. And all of those are explained at michigan.gov/vote, but also available to call your local clerk. Before every election, you can go and watch the machines be tested so that you can have firsthand confidence that those machines are accurate. You also could work as a poll worker, as we know many AARP members do, and you could see firsthand just how secure the process is. So we want people to have that faith and that confidence in their vote and in their voice. And we know the truth and transparency is on our side in that regard. So we encourage people to ask questions, and then seek out the answers from trusted sources, so that you can rely on the validity of the answers.
We had several of the clerks on a show some time ago, and the amount of work that they do to make certain that just they're incredible. But there has still been that kind of rumor mill that things aren't. But you've been, not you, Secretary of State's office in our election has been audited how many times?
Oh yeah, we ourselves audited the elections at the local level hundreds of times. 250 audits were conducted in 2020. Because again, if there's questions, if there's a need to look into things, we want to look into them. We want to make sure everything was by the book. We want to make sure everything was covered under the law. And indeed it was, and the results were accurate. And so we welcome the questions. But what we ask is that, one, people do so civilly and with courtesy, but also when you have the evidence that there is no wrongdoing, that we accept that. And too often you have, I think, particularly candidates for office or politicians trying to stoke the fears and spread the lies and the misinformation. And people need to be, critical consumers of information and ask questions about, why is this person saying this? What's the agenda behind it? And what is their actual evidence that exists to suggest that they're right? But if you follow the evidence, if you follow the truth, if you listen to trusted voices, you'll be led in the right direction to see that indeed our elections are accurate, they are secure, and we can trust the results.
And you have been on every national news channel that I watch all of them, some because I want to see the opposition, but that's another show. But you have been on every single one of them and considered the leader, really, when it comes to constitutional law, when it comes to voting, and written a couple of books. Tell us how you got involved in this one. Why are you so passionate about this? I just love hearing you talk about it. And I just want to say what she said. That's all.
Well, my parents were special education teachers. And so I learned from them at a young age how important it is for us all to have a voice and a seat at the table. And I started my career in Montgomery, Alabama, where I was investigating hate groups and hate crimes throughout the country. And it was really there, being so close to Selma and seeing and talking to people who were at the foot of the bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, in March of 1965, and stood and fought and pushed for a Voting Rights Act that it would protect every right to vote, that I became deeply inspired, but also committed to continuing that work, knowing that it's every generation's responsibility to continue the fight for democracy, as John Lewis said. And I've embraced that responsibility. It led me to get to be the chief election officer for the state of Michigan in this critical moment. And it's been the honor of my lifetime to serve in this role and continue protecting and defending every voice and every vote of every citizen in our state.
Well, we certainly appreciate you lifting your voice in support of everyone, all Michiganders. When you think about what you've gone through in terms of the election and what's coming, what's the greatest concern, not just in terms of people having the voices, but in terms of the results of the election? And once those results, all the ballots are, have been counted and everything's finished. Any concerns there? I mean, I know you're going to double check, triple check everything else, but any concerns there in terms of how we message that?
Well, as always, all the procedures and rules will be filed and will be followed, and I'm sure you'll see more transparency than ever before, welcoming people into the process so you can observe. And as long as there's no disruption, people are welcome to observe and see how ballots are counted and verified and see all the security checks we have in place, or serve as poll workers as well. And so after the election is done, regardless of who wins any particular election, my goal will continue to be to protect those results from attempts to subvert them or cause doubts or sow seeds of fear around them. And we're prepared to do that more than we were certainly in 2020, because we've seen just how far people will go. And the reality is, when you're looking at this presidential election that's coming up in 24, it is going to be a close election. All the data suggests that. No matter, sometimes the wind blows one way, sometimes the wind blows another. But when you have a close election, particularly in Michigan, it's so important that everyone votes, and it's so important that we have a transparent process that people can believe in and accept the results, even if they disagree with them. So that's what we'll be working towards in the months ahead. We know a lot of candidates may not help us in that regard. Some people like to shepherd in lies and misinformation, but we will be focused on the truth, and we'll be focused on working with everyone who's willing to work with us to share that truth, to give people confidence in the results and in their vote.
I appreciate that, and that's needed. I did not think that in this 2023, 24 that we'd still be talking about voting rights.
I know.
I don't think any of us really thought, 10, 15, 20 years ago we'd be still fighting that fight, but thank you for fighting that fight. Here we are, and we'll fight it, and every generation after us shall continue to fight and to make certain that we don't lose the rights that we've been given. You mentioned a primary in February, and people are not aware, may not be aware of what's going on because they're so used to the primary being the same time, but there have been some changes. Can we talk a little bit about the primary?
The statewide primary, which will take place on February 27th, will be the first primary where there will be 9 days of early voting throughout the state. So you can try it out and see how you like it. And you can go to michigan.gov/vote and find out where you can vote early by entering your information. And you've got 2 weekends and the full week before Election Day to try it out and see what it's like. And you'll find the clerks have been so excited to set this up and are so proud, along with election workers who are working every day to make this available. So that will be available. And the presidential primary in particular will be an opportunity for you to vote in one party or the other's primary on a particular candidate for president, and the outcome of which will inform the selection of delegates to ultimately nominate someone to be the presidential candidate on the ballot in the fall.
And so people aren't used to thinking about voting in February. That's a change. That's
indeed.
one of the
We are now one of the earliest primaries. It will be just a few weeks after the Iowa caucus. So we'll have a more influential stake than ever before in our elections and in the primary nomination process, not just in 24, but in 28 and beyond.
I know you talked a little bit about the motivating people to get out and vote, to make certain that they're not disenchanted with the whole process and that they don't get discouraged. Young people in particular have really spoken out regarding their vote. What are some of the issues that you're hearing across the state that are most important to young people and older adults? Are you hearing about issues in particular? I know your focus is primarily on making people vote, but are you hearing about issues that are important to them?
Overwhelmingly, climate change and environmental concerns are in the forefront of the mind of our youngest voters, as well as paying for their education and getting a well-paying job after graduation, and also secondarily housing. Where are they going to live? And I very much want everyone to stay in Michigan. And when you have 60% of U of M graduates leaving the state, we also want to find out about how we as leaders can do more to keep them here in Michigan and so that they can continue to reinvest in our state and help us all thrive.
That's very similar to what we're hearing as well from what we call our Thought Leadership Council, a group of young people that we work with all the time, and climate change is at the top of the list. What about older adults? What are you hearing from them?
Services, a lot of times. How can we make sure you get access to different services, whether it be Medicare or whether it be access to Social Security? Concerns about the future of Social Security as well, and just that a lot of folks have worked hard and have earned the serenity of retirement and the safety of that safety net that has been created and accessible for generations. So I think wanting to make sure we'll still have access to different services and be taken care of has been at the forefront of a lot of folks' minds. And just second, I see this as someone who runs a large state agency that interacts with every resident. When we modernize things, we have to make sure that we maintain traditional ways of doing things too, so that no matter how someone chooses to vote or interact with our office, they can do so easily. And so that's been top of mind. It's one of the reasons why we launched our mobile offices to go to senior centers, so that if people still want that in-person interaction at a branch office, they can have it right in their own backyard.
And that's something that we hear over and over again. What about people in senior centers and homes? What are they going to do? We've got about 30 seconds left. What would you like to share with the folks?
We've got a big election year coming up in 2024, so we want to make sure to go to michigan.gov/vote and get all the information you need to vote in every election, February, August, and November, 3 statewide elections. And also consider serving as an election worker. If you don't already do, you can sign up to be an election worker in Michigan at michigan.gov/vote.
And they can sign up to volunteer for AARP at the same time and get the message out. Thank you so much.
Yes,
I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Retirement. That word comes up a lot with me for some reason. I'm glad you're here, Chris. So you can talk about retirement and legacy planning. What do people need to know?
Yeah. Well, I think there's 5 key areas as it relates to planning for your retirement and a legacy. And we have a process, and we call it creating your retirement blueprint. And there's 5 key areas. So first is income planning, figuring out when to take Social Security. Should we take the pension? How are we going to recreate that income that we had while we're working? Second is investment planning, managing market risk, making sure that the way that we invest when we're 60 or 70 probably should be different than when we were 30, right? Third is tax planning, and I think taxes are one of the biggest risks and biggest opportunities with the changes in tax code. Fourth is healthcare and long-term care planning, especially long-term care costs can be devastating for a family.
Absolutely.
And then the 5th key area is that legacy planning. So what are you going to leave to the next generation? And I'm not just talking about assets or net worth, but how are you going to remember it? Did you have a plan, or was it a mess that the kids had to clean up?
And how many times have we all seen that, where even celebrities don't have a will, don't have an estate? So what do people need to know? I mean, if you're thinking about retirement, if you're thinking about legacy, and you want to do that, what do they need? What's the first step they should take?
Well, the first step is they should find someone who's done it before. And that's really where we come into play as certified financial planners, certified elder law attorneys. We bring the legal, the financial, tax planning all into one solid plan for the benefit of our clients.
And so people need to make sure that a person is certified. How do they find someone? Yeah. How do they do? They go to Yellow Pages? There's no Yellow Pages. Google. What do they do?
Right. So a lot of times referrals, but also certified financial planners and certified elder law attorneys, which are the gold standard as it relates to estate planning and financial planning. You can find them online, but a lot of times talking to friends or other coworkers is a great way.
Sounds good. Thanks for being here, and thanks for that good advice.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm here to talk to you about gout. Gout is a painful inflammatory condition that is caused by the buildup of uric acid crystals in the joints. The hallmark symptom of gout is a sudden, severe joint pain that is often described as a throbbing sensation. The pain typically starts at night and reaches its peak within a few hours. The affected joint becomes tender, swollen, and very sensitive to touch or movement. Gout typically affects the big toe. However, it can also affect other joints such as your wrists, your ankles, your knees. It's important with proper management to prevent recurrent attacks. Treatment of gout focuses on managing acute flares and preventing recurring attacks. During acute flares, medications such as NSAIDs, ibuprofen, indomethacin can be used to reduce pain and inflammation. Colchicine, it's another anti-inflammatory medication that can be used to relieve symptoms during acute flares. There are certain lifestyle changes that can prevent recurring gout attacks. Avoiding purine-rich foods such as red meat, seafood, or alcohol, maintaining a healthy weight, exercising regularly, and hydrating adequately. For people who have recurrent attacks, it's important to start a therapy that will decrease uric acid in the blood. Allopurinol is a medication that is typically used for that purpose. If you have any questions, contact your primary care provider or ask for a referral to a rheumatologist near you.
Transportation and things to consider. Thank you so much for being here. What are some considerations that people should ponder before deciding whether or not to tell a loved one to give up driving or not? It's a hard decision to make.
Very hard, absolutely. Well, as people age, they often experience diminishing vision and hearing, and also cognition and physical ability. And those are good prompts for whether or not you should give up driving and consider other modes of transportation.
It's hard to recognize those sometimes. I mean, so what are some of the signs that what do you actually see? Someone being impaired and not able to drive?
Sure. Not being able to see ahead and react appropriately to other stimulus that is outside of their control. That's one of the biggest triggers, I think, or marks of diminishing ability for driving.
And sometimes it's probably a good idea to have them look at other modes of transportation before they get to that point so they're comfortable with those. Is that correct?
Sure, absolutely. Another impetus is also the fixed income that most seniors are on, where the ability to afford gas, insurance, and the general maintenance of a vehicle may be a little bit out of reach for them. So that's another sign.
And there are options. People need to apply for it. Those options are like Spectrum and some of those other options.
That's right. And that Spectrum application is reviewed by a third party. It is Disability Network Capital Area, and the application can be found at cata.org/Spectran.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
There's so much information that was shared today. Please don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend and let them know that there's some real possibilities right here at AARP Michigan.